We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Drushinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. Make sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts as well. Today, I'm happy to be joined by my colleague, Christopher Bedford, senior editor here at The Federalist, and Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, also the author of the new book, Republic Under Assault. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you both.
Well, of course. Now, over the course of the last week, we've learned new information thanks to releases in the Durham probe, particularly as it relates to Sussmann. And Tom, you've been working on this for years. Brian Stelter sort of hilariously called it a dud, a media critic apparently. But Tom, if you could kind of help us break down the news that we received from the Durham probe, and maybe even tell us a little bit about some of those documents that Judicial Watch is still pursuing when it comes to this particular element of the investigation.
Well, the Sussmann indictment shows that it's the position of the United States government that, in my view, there was a criminal conspiracy targeting Donald Trump, and it involved the Clinton campaign. It confirms the Clinton campaign, in the least, was being criminally investigated, and suggests it is under criminal investigation. And I encourage all your listeners and viewers to go and review the indictment themselves. They can figure out who the unnamed people are, more or less. But it's pretty clear that, according to the indictment, that Sussmann and his partners at Perkins Coie and the Democratic National Committee you represented, the Clinton campaign, they were working with these outsiders, including Fusion GPS, to falsify information that they get then sent to the FBI. Now, Sussmann was only indicted supposedly for lying about who he was representing. I'm kind of skeptical of the sense that I believe the FBI official who met with him, James Baker, the FBI general counsel. He knew exactly what was going on. Heck, they've been working with Christopher Steele all summer.
And that seems to be something that's all over this, is every one of these players knew what was going on. That's one of the things that shocked me. It wasn't just Perkins Coie tricked them or Sussmann tricked people. It seemed like everyone was in on this.
Yeah, I mean, taking the general counsel's word, he didn't know he was specifically there, I guess, on behalf of Hillary Clinton Democratic National Committee. And, and according to Durham's indictment, that failure to disclose, that duty to disclose, did not resulted in the FBI obviously misallocating resources. But I would take a step back looking at the indictment. Heck, these folks haven't been indicted for any of this. So let's be clear. No one's been found guilty necessarily. And I'm just looking at the indictment and saying, well, what other crimes are out there? And it looks to me, based on the indictment, it was that they made up this allegation that they investigated and quickly found wanting the allegation that there was a connection between this Alpha Bank, which is a Russia bank, and the Trump organization, that there were internet activity that suggested something skullduggerous was going on. But they admitted that it turned out there was no there there, and I think that's a quote, and that it was a red herring. Nevertheless, they developed a document to mislead people that there was a there there, and they gave it to the FBI. Now, I ain't no lawyer. But it occurs to me that if you knowingly go to the FBI with information that you believe to be false and have reason to believe is false, and you don't share that with the FBI and asking them to investigate it, that's a crime. So to me, there are significant crimes here implicating the Clinton campaign. And of course, we know separately that Hillary Clinton, through her Twitter feed, was specifically pushing this allegation, suggesting that it was independent researchers who would come up with it as opposed to our own flunkies.
Yeah, and remember
criminal stuff.
Just to remind some of our viewers, because so much happened so quickly. I mean, I was just in a room with a bunch of folks on the Capitol Hill, and they're already admitting that Capitol Hill's forgotten about Afghanistan already. Things happened so quickly. These allegations were in the news. They were breaking every day. The connections, the secret server. I remember the Hillary Clinton press release that said, here are the facts. The Trump campaign has a secret server. The secret server is used to communicate with foreign governments. Basically, the stuff that Hillary Clinton was being accused of, the Secret Server aspects. And she was trying to point out just how hypocritical this was, how insane this was, how the press, I guess, is apparently nicer to Republicans than they are to Democrats, which was a difficult thing to believe. And it turned out that none of that's true. But can you remind some of our listeners and viewers about how they would remember this story and what the allegations were that turned out to be invented?
That Donald Trump was a tool of the Russians. That was an invention out of whole cloth. There was no good faith reason to suggest that was the case, and that he had financial interests in Russia that were being leveraged against him in a way that was inappropriate. As you point out, the Secret Server, which is essentially the Alpha Bank connection, which is kind of the shorthand way of calling it, the shorthand way of describing that is the secret Russia server. And it was all a lie. And when in fact, the information was that Hillary Clinton was using Russia sources to try to tie, according to the FBI and the IG, to tie Donald Trump to the Russians. And, look, to be clear here, when you look at the indictment, I call it, there's a phrase here in town called the self-licking ice cream cone. Oh, look, we have evidence. Well, what's the evidence? Well, we are the evidence. Yeah. Oh, look, there's a news story about it that confirms that it needs to be investigated. Well, what's the basis of the news story? Well, we are.
Yes.
So who are your witnesses? Well, I have three witnesses, me, myself, and I.
Or what's the basis?
And we all heard it from each other.
They did the same thing with the FISA warrant.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing. It's not just the Clinton campaign. You had the FBI paying, and this is one of the material that Judicial Watch was able to uncover, that they were paying Steele. They met with Steele 13 times before they, quote, fired him, even then they really didn't want to fire him. They tried to use him again. And they paid him 11 of those times. So you had a joint operation funding Steele to try to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. One paid for by the Obama administration with your tax dollars. The other one hidden from the public through disguised funding, paid for by the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so I want to talk about something you just said exactly, which is the news media angle of all of this. I forget whether it was Natasha Bertrand or somebody else, but Glenn Greenwald actually just had a fantastic column on this week. You look at this Sussmann situation and the reporters who ran with the information and probably should have known better if they had dug into it and talked to experts. Now, what we see in the indictment is experts at the time said, this is probably shouldn't be framed as though it's, damning evidence of Russia collusion in and of itself. But it's amazing how reporters take this information and sort of swallow it uncritically. So, Tom, from your vantage point, having gone through these documents over the years and sort of watched this play out in real time, what role does bad journalism play in enabling these like opposition bureaucrats to do their dirty work?
Just reporting garbage from political campaigns, it's a journalistic sin, but it's been happening since the beginning of our country. What we found through these documents and documents we obtained, for instance, Associated Press reporters met with Andrew Weissman and his folks over at the FBI, DOJ. This was before Mueller was appointed, and they gave him the codes for a locker of Paul Manafort. And they gave them other information about Manafort's alleged dealings abroad. And you had the Justice Department and the FBI collaborating with the Associated Press to prosecute Paul Manafort. It was clear the AP reporters were pushing for his prosecution, and they were giving, in turn, the FBI and DOJ were giving them privileged information. So I don't know how much worse could it get than newspaper reporters, I call it newspaper reporters, but wire reporters, Associated Press, going into a government official and advocating for the prosecution of people they're reporting on. And, don't trust me. You can look at the documents we uncovered about the Associated Press from the Justice Department about this. It's incredible material. And so it wasn't even just reporting material that they should have known was bad. It was they wanted to put people in jail that they had a political distaste for. And in the case of Manafort, they wanted to kneecap the Trump campaign by going after his campaign manager.
So I'm actually going to correct myself quickly. It was Franklin Foer, who I think was at the Atlantic or Slate in question. But it is just like this mentality that Donald Trump is bad. Therefore, everybody associated with him, my priors are going to be confirmed and I'll be much less critical.
And those are good examples of people not really quite being held accountable for anything.
Exactly.
The amount of people who've been involved in this, perpetuating this hoax from the start, none of them have been held accountable. There haven't been even, there's not remotely anything approaching an apology. There will never be anyone returning the prizes, the journalistic prizes other journalists gave to them for this stuff. But I admit I was a little disappointed by the end so far of what we've been watching in the Phoenix. We've been watching the hotel where Durham has been staying and keeping an eye on these things, waiting for it all to drop. And what it ends up coming down is essentially what all these Trump people got in trouble for, but it seems like almost anyone who's ever talked to the FBI who the FBI wants to hurt gets in trouble for, which is lying to the FBI at some point or another. That seems almost anticlimactic, although when you dig into the lies and explain what the lies were, as you did, intentionally bringing fraudulent evidence in to try and get someone prosecuted, it does seem a lot worse than what we've seen. I mean, is this the end?
Well, I hope not. If it's the end, it would be a disappointing end. I've been second to none in criticizing the Durham investigation and being concerned there was really no evidence they were investigating what they should have been investigating. Here now we have evidence that they were investigating the Clinton campaign. They went after the lawyers behind the dossier, and there's a crime associated with that. And the left would have you believe this is, quote, a process crime, and which is very different than you being under investigation and then, lying or misremembering and then getting indicted because of it, as opposed to the fundamental activity that was initially being investigated, which was, were the crimes committed in the spying on Donald Trump and the effort to target him? We have confirmation now that Hillary Clinton's top campaign lawyer, one of two, did commit a crime to move this agenda along. And the only question is for Durham, or we should have for Durham, is are there going to be other prosecutions? Because this indictment shows that the criminal conspiracy goes beyond this one man. So let's hope that more comes. But, in the meantime, Congress has got to get on the ball. Some of our friends in Congress who are interested in this have completely dropped it. And the media obviously is what it is. And this is why, we were in court 2 weeks ago trying to get the underlying document completely released or more fully released that was behind Strzok's decision to open up, or Strzok's justification to open up the spy operation against Donald Trump. And why is it that a spy operation against a presidential campaign, unprecedented in scope, is little old Judicial Watch is the only one still trying to figure out what the heck went on? I mean, this is the way this decrepit city operates. They're happy to tear down the statues of politicians from 150 years ago, but we can't ask what went on 4 years ago, let alone 4 days ago.
Yeah.
Because that's old news.
So when you say that some of your friends in Congress are perhaps less interested in pursuing some of this than they were in the past, does that have to do with, Democrats have won the House back and they have this now very narrow majority in the Senate, and the manpower or just the power to pursue investigations is lower? Like, what is it that has dampened Republican interest in sort of maybe pursuing or tying up some of these loose ends?
Or is it just the news cycle? I mean, are Republicans just paying attention to what Fox News is playing at the moment?
I don't know. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I believe that leadership can move and educate people, and I'm not seeing the leadership on these anti-corruption issues. Republicans are happy to highlight corruption when running for office and often fail to pursue it once they're there. And here, Biden, for instance, it's just remarkable to me. His son is under criminal investigation. There's credible evidence implicating his father in the crimes, or what ought to be under criminal investigation, and there's been zero noise to get a special counsel appointed, which is required under Justice Department regulations, as we were beat about the head and shoulders with in terms of having that regulation cited in targeting Donald Trump. So they had nothing, and they get a special counsel for Donald Trump that tried to destroy him. And here you have a substantive criminal case against Joe Biden, who the evidence is Joe Biden is the most personally corrupt person to come into the presidency since Lyndon Johnson, and arguably worse than Johnson, given the international nature of his racketeering operation, as I would allege. And there's no special counsel. To me, that's a failure of leadership on the part of Republicans. And you know, the American people haven't forgotten about this. They still are concerned about Hillary's corruption. But it ain't cool. It ain't cool to talk about that, even among some of our friends on the Hill who normally are with us on these issues.
I like to always back up and do like a 30,000-foot thing. You've mentioned Perkins Coie a couple times, and if you live and work in D.C., you certainly know who they are and what they get up to. And it's a name that's actually come up multiple times over the course of the Russia investigation. If you're paying attention to that, you've seen it sort of come up a lot. But Tom, can you tell us, what this particular firm, 30,000-foot view, what is their role in all of this?
Well, it was the Democratic Party's law firm. It was Hillary Clinton's campaign firm. So, Robert Sussmann, Michael Sussmann, people aren't going to remember that name. Substitute Hillary Clinton for Perkins Coie. I mean, it was Hillary Clinton's avatar who was indicted, as far as I'm concerned. And, and Mark Elias and the Perkins Coie law firm, I think Elias has set up another firm, coincidentally. He's no longer with the firm, I think, according to at least one report. They were behind the effort. They were the key. He's the top lawyer for the Democrats in election matters. So all those changes to the superstructure of our elections that people objected to, Mark Elias was advocating for it. So, he's not a and the question is why, what, if anything, he's going to have to answer for in terms of this conspiracy to bring down Donald Trump. Look, in terms of politics, it may be unethical to lie to the media about a candidate, but I don't know if it's a crime.
If it is, everyone would go to prison.
Yeah. I mean, there may be a civil claim that someone has against that, for defamation or whatever. But, but it was them messing with the FBI and DOJ. And, just because the FBI and DOJ were willing collaborators and were willing to eat it up, doesn't mean you didn't have an obligation to tell the truth about it. And of course, we've since learned that they all knew at the time that Hillary had good reason for keeping this focus on Trump, because she needed it to distract from her criminal liability, which I think was wrongly, not pursued by the Justice Department. The other dirty secret is that once the Trump administration came in, there was this interest by the deep state and, frankly, the Clinton camp and Obama, Biden / in terms of freezing the Justice Department, by making it impossible for them to do what everyone expected them to do in terms of holding Hillary, Obama, and others accountable for this, by keeping the focus on Trump. And the Justice Department could do no other, or refuse to do any other anti-corruption investigations. In fact, we were in court fighting them. They were defending Hillary Clinton's conduct in some of the issues we were battling over, and hiding documents from us that were, it was one of the most shocking things in my professional career to see the Justice Department under the Trump administration and the State Department, run by people who, supposedly are good people, just cover up for Hillary in the end.
And there's a lot of this stuff. Generally, I try to tell people that DC is more like an episode of Veep, the comedy, than it is House of Cards, the drama. A lot of the people who are dealing with the situations around Capitol Hill are not remotely as intelligent as I think they are.
Peter Strzok, Lisa Page.
There's a lot of people who are sleeping with reporters and their sources. There's a lot of captive reporters generally, you find this in business, you find this in industry, you find this in politics, you find this in the Department of Defense. The reporters work hard to get the sources and end up starting to see the world the same way that their sources see the world. And like you said, it's a self-licking ice cream cone. But there seems to be also something more to this story. It's not just a comedy of errors. It seems like there's really intentional manipulation of reporters. And what blew my mind through this whole thing is how this continued throughout all of Russiagate. It's really clear when you're looking at any reporter after a few months who their sources are, what their sources want, whether it was Pencilneck or the FBI or anyone else. You start to get it, and they get burned over and over and over again, where information would eventually come out a few months later, no longer made a difference, the public had moved on, that said, hey, this isn't true, but they would still go back to that source. And this is where I start to wonder if it's beyond just stupidity, if how much of these reporters were just actually just trying to take down Trump. That's all they cared about. They were fully in on it, because I tell you what, if I had a story and I relied on my source, and my source turned out to be completely full of it, I would not be taking their phone calls again. I would be embarrassed. I'd be angry, and they would be in trouble with me. We didn't see that in D.C. We didn't see that through the entire Trump administration.
Well, if you're a political advocacy group, you would have a different approach. And I think much of the major media now is just their political advocacy groups that sometimes engage in journalism. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean they sometimes don't do some good reporting here and there and provide information we otherwise would have known about. But on Russiagate, Judicial Watch has done more substantial investigation and journalism in the traditional sense of the word than any other major media organization. I mean, we just rely on government documents lawfully given to us, and we use the tools available to us under law to obtain them. And I think one of the other dirty little secrets here is that this isn't just a journalist malpractice. My view is, that's not my view. The fact is, there are no exemptions to the media in the laws for the mishandling and publication of classified information. And, one of the issues that has popped up, and some Republicans, in my view, are not really thinking clearly about this, is this exemption for the media from being held accountable under our court processes. You had the Biden administration basically shut down these leak investigations and come up with new rules to provide either further exemptions to journalists that no citizen would get. So, so they get to publish classified information, destroy people. I mean, look, we've litigated on behalf of whistleblowers trying to get information from journalists who had information illegally leaked to them by corrupt government officials. And because of these journalist exemptions, we have trouble getting the information. So this idea that journalists deserve special protection from the laws that govern the rest of us is as objectionable as the idea that Hillary Clinton shouldn't be prosecuted because she lost the presidency and leave her alone. This is just garbage. It's garbage ethics.
A lot of these journalists still act like that they are journalists. I mean, a lot of the people who are just drinking bottomless mimosa brunch in D.C. compare themselves to those who risk getting their head cut off every day reporting on the cartels, or actually in Afghanistan trying to report on the Taliban. There are reporters around the world who put themselves in harm's way and are incredibly brave. D.C. doesn't have them, but they put themselves in the same noble class of people. They think that they should get those protections. So if you are reporting on corruption, if you're trying to expose the very real corruption that is in our U.S. government, then I understand there's reasons for these protections. But just like you said, so many of these organizations, so many of these news outlets, corporate outlets, really are just activist organizations, and they get the same protection. It's a little kooky, the world we're living in these days.
Look, they will take either government talking points or party or candidate talking points, all from one side, and that's the narrative that they will push. I mean, they will literally tell people we have to ask these questions because they've been written up for them by their partisan or left-wing sources, and too often it's government sources as well. We can talk forever on this, but too much of Washington journalism is just gossip. Yeah, it's not. Anyone can write gossip. These are gossip columnists largely, and that's why they hated Trump, because he directly spoke to the American people through his Twitter feed, was the most transparent president in arguably history in terms of giving people an insight into what he was thinking every day. And, the media hated being, because they usually tried to report that gossip about what he was thinking when he would tell people directly what he was thinking.
It's so interesting what you said, making that comparison between some of these legacy media outlets, all of these legacy media outlets and Judicial Watch, and some of these questions that you've been pursuing doggedly, which you would expect reporters, ink-stained wretches, to be pursuing doggedly and doing the sort of shoe leather journalism. And they really haven't. And it's just amusing this week to watch Ben Schreckinger of Politico come out with his Hunter Biden book, and Politico say that they have confirmed the veracity of Hunter Biden emails from the hard drive, when in fact we've known for forever that they were verified. Essentially,
he needs to be holding his ID. He's standing there naked.
Yeah.
And taking selfies. I mean, I laughed out loud when they say Politico, first in Politico, we have confirmed these emails were real. Really? Because he did that already.
Right.
He did that. He's like, I think that sure looks like me.
Well, what are they thinking? What are they thinking? I don't know. Tom, from your vantage point, what was it like to watch this week the legacy media decide finally it's okay to talk about the potential validity of the Hunter Biden emails because Politico confirmed
a book deal that was signed, inked. This whole book deal, started writing this book at a time when other reporters, real reporters, the New York Post and other places were being censored, taken off of Twitter and taken off of social media. At that moment, the corporate media was working on a book because they knew it was true, but they wanted to wait and they didn't speak up for their colleagues.
Does it feel like upside down world, Tom?
Yeah, I mean the delay is political in the sense that to the degree they will admit any truths or allow that those of us who've been telling it like it is, may have some truth behind what they're saying. It's usually designed to come out in a way that there's no accountability or designed to prevent meaningful accountability for the target of the investigation. But to me, all of this has been there. Even the mainstream media usually admits to the truth even sooner than it has here. But, my guess is you can find admissions that this is likely relevant and credible evidence. Certainly the FBI's handling of it was suggestive of that. The big question is, what do they do with the revelations? Mm-hmm. So in the case of Michael Cohen, when he's indicted, it's blaring headlines. The president of the United States is facing, the other shoe's going to drop. He's going to face jail. Hillary Clinton's top lawyer is indicted, implicating his Biden's national security staffer, national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, and it's just a yawn. I mean, they're partisan advocacy groups, and even when they report the truth, it's presented in a way to prevent political damage to their allies.
We haven't even gotten to the Jake Sullivan angle. That's another thing that gives the story an added layer of immediate political relevance. So, Tom, if our listeners aren't totally familiar with what we learned about Jake Sullivan, what we know about Jake Sullivan, currently the President Biden's national security advisor, break this down for us when it comes to Jake Sullivan.
Well, Jake Sullivan, who was one of Hillary Clinton's top advisors in the State Department during the Benghazi outrage, was her foreign policy advisor on the campaign. And reading between the lines in the indictment, it doesn't name him directly, but it's clear it references him. Jake Sullivan was part of the discussion about the handling of this dossier. The dirty. I shouldn't say it's a dirty secret. There were multiple dossiers. You have to have a chart to track all the dossiers, and Jake Sullivan, along with Hillary, was pushing this false information about the Russians. So we have a national security advisor who wasn't only just lying about domestic politics, was trying to wrongly and knowingly, it looks like, implicate a country which we have a tenuous relationship with, and a dangerous one, in interference in our elections and manipulation of Donald Trump. That's dangerous. And, it's one thing to say, we saw, he they didn't show up for votes, and he's the worst politician in the world because, he didn't vote or whatever. He makes too much money from big tech or pharma or whatever, whatever the typical opposition research is. It's another thing to make up stuff implicating a foreign country that we have a difficult relationship with. That's dangerous. It's downright dangerous. And Trump's response to this has always been, in my view, correct. It's like, these people want a war with Russia. You would think they would.
Yeah. Well, so Tom, you've been doing this for a while, and the one question that I want to ask before we wrap up is that there's been a lot of talk on the right kind of recently about the so-called deep state over the last, again, 5 or so years, and whether or not you use that term. I'm curious as if there is anything that's jumped out at you now, having gone through all of these documents for so long. Is there anything, a broader narrative, something specific that managed to surprise even you after watching all of this unfold and pouring through these documents yourself?
The government, the corrupt officials are not that smart. They're petty. And the fact that no one's been able to hold them accountable shows a remarkable lack of leadership. It's not like you're dealing with Machiavelli here. You're dealing with the Clinton gang. You're dealing with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. And our system can't figure out a way to uphold the rule of law against this group of, the Keystone Cops of corruption. When you look at the emails, I've read all Hillary Clinton's emails. I wasn't impressed. I wasn't impressed. I mean, it was, this is money grubbing folks who are just trying to get a piece of the action. And any law enforcement official worth their salary could have made a case against them. And the fact nothing happened is just beyond, I shouldn't say beyond comprehension, but is a terrible indictment. And, our Justice Department, if I were running for office, I'd be talking about cutting the budgets in half of these agencies. In the least. What is the FBI there for? What is the Justice Department actually doing? I mean, to me, the Justice Department, I think I will leave you with this. The Justice Department is a menace to the Republic, how it's currently run and constituted. They defend the indefensible. They think they're above the law. They think they're above the Constitution. They think they're above accountable government, any notion of accountable government. And I was talking to someone very senior in the Trump White House. I have a story here for you. And, not someone who's generally known as pro-Trump, one of that crew. And he said, Tom, after all this is over, we have to think of a way to bring the Justice Department back into the government. That's we're in a constitutional crisis, and whether anyone wants to call it that is, that's to me just the reality. And until that's addressed directly, it's just going to continue this lawlessness and the catch me if you can approach to governance that we're seeing again from the Biden administration that Obama started.
Not a particularly happy thought, but an important one. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, also the author of the new book, Republic Under Assault. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist, joined today by my colleague, Christopher Bedford, senior editor at The Federalist. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.